Well, some of them have gone into great detail, like Jerry Stone. If you want detail on every aspect of an Apollo mission, he's done presentations on that.
Yeah.
And he can parrot every step of the way that NASA has done. He does it perfectly. If you want all of the information that NASA is going to provide, he can give it to you. And he doesn't question any of it.
Yeah.
And he is probably the best of the parrots out there, with the exception of the fact that he presents to adults.
Yeah.
Most of the other ones present to students and very young students. And I have a problem with that.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Influencing them in that direction. If you're an adult, you can listen to him, but you can also listen to us and make up your own mind. When you take somebody like Barrett, and he goes in there and he actually tells the children what kind of idiots we are, don't listen to us. He's directing them. And he does it openly. He does it on his website.
Yeah, he does.
And yet, he won't sit down and discuss it with me. He stopped discussing it with you because he realizes he's in a losing situation.
Yes.
Right? But he simply runs away from me because I just have to put that one picture in front of him, that soaking wet flag, and he's gone.
Peter Bassett won't correspond with me at all now. I sent him what I thought was a very reasonable critique of his book, or the first quarter of it, and asked him for his comments.
Yeah.
If I made a mistake, I'm sure he'd have told me. I haven't had a word, so I assume I'm correct.
I still can't imagine that a man that looks through a telescope can claim that there's a diffusion of light through space. I mean, that's just unbelievable. Diffusion of light happens through an atmosphere, not in space.
Of course it does.
He claims the other because of that Apollo 12, the sunlight in the NVIDIA image that they reproduced. They reproduced the diffusion of light, which proves it was taken on Earth. Even though they're trying to show with their highly technical computer simulation, it's almost as good as a photocopy of what they were doing, taking that picture.
It was good.
Yeah, which was good that way. And they were so concentrated on reproducing the light in the reflection off the surface that they had to jump it up. But they completely forgot, there's the sun, there's the diffusion of light, and it shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
But they had to reproduce it the same as the photograph showed.
Yeah, which they failed to do because the hatch, which in the photograph, as you've shown, is so dark you can't see anything.
Yeah.
And just for avoidance of doubt, NVIDIA did invite me to take part in that program. But when they said I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement with conditions attached, I refused. Because they could have kept me quiet for many years after that. It was done as a piece of publicity for their Maxwell GPU, which is fair enough, you know, if you're going to use a bit of publicity, but at least get your facts right. Because they said that it was Neil Armstrong's spacesuit which provided the additional illumination. No, it wasn't. It wasn't big enough. There certainly wasn't enough reflection off the lunar surface, which has the reflectivity of a road surface, to provide it either. So they faked it. There's a lot around NASA which is faked, which is what's so sad about it, because people actually want to believe that NASA have done what they claim to have done, i.e. fly man to the moon. I watched it live. I mean, a dwindling band of people who actually did sit there and watch that particular transmission on July the 20th, 1969, of man landing on the moon. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. What an achievement. I had no reason to disbelieve it until I started looking at it.
None of us did.
No.
We were brought into the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And some of us got back out.
NASA had to be seen to succeed. There's no way they could have failed. It was a political event. It wasn't anything to do with science or anything like that. When John Kennedy said we'll land a man on the moon before the decade is out, it was a political statement. I just,
wanted to prove that the U.S. was superior to any other country in the world.
yeah, exactly.
And they still make that claim today. And when you question NASA and their capabilities, you're questioning their claim that they are a superior nation at the same time. And that's when they really take offense to it.
Yeah.
They can't separate the two.
Yeah. And what is so sad is that by maintaining this fiction of Apollo, they will not only fail to repeat anything close to it, they will also bring America into disrepute. Most people will be perfectly willing to say, okay, it was a political event, you had to do it, it's a brilliantly executed propaganda exercise, which succeeded, you demonstrated the superiority of American technology, great, no problem with that at all, but don't maintain a fiction that you landed men on the moon, because you didn't.
Right. The other part of it is that they get a pretty good budget, and they actually make money. I've seen figures. I've looked it up, and for every dollar that the government puts into NASA, they're getting $10 back.
Yeah, could well be.
And or more. And people say, how do you do that? Well, they've got the buildings. They're leasing them out to like SpaceX and all kinds of stuff like that, right? And Blue Origin are one of their biggest guys leasing that property out. But they have museums in every state. And you're getting like, the one in Houston's getting like 1.5 million people a month going through the place.
Yeah.
I mean, they're making money. That's why they took Orion and put it in the museum so people could go see it. Because it makes them money.
But Orion's supposed to go to the moon. What's he doing in a museum? Because he didn't work.
Right. It's their version, like if you have a YouTube channel now and you can monetize it and make money off of it, you're going to keep doing it because once the video's out there, people can just watch it and do it. So they put, Orion in a museum and say, there it is, go see it. Everybody that walks through the door, they're getting their money back. Right? So they are making money off of that thing for its 4 hours and 24-minute flight.
Yep.
That's, and it could just be a shell sitting there. I'm sure they have reproductions of it in other museums because they got at least 50 museums that they got to put it in, right? One in every state. So that's what they're doing with it. That's quite the incentive.
Well,
even though NASA hasn't done anything in a decade to keep it alive. And people don't seem to get that. NASA's not doing anything. Okay, they probably working with Boeing to develop better commercial aircraft because they got the facilities to do all the jet engine testing and fuels and different, create different stuff. And they've got the employees to do that as well. And they're probably working with General Motors because that's also now a government-owned operation. They're probably working on battery technology as well for it.
Oh, but they worked on that right at the beginning because they had the lunar rover.
If they're going to claim to be in space, they've got to have better batteries out there too, right?
Of course
so they're going to end up in GM cars, and that's where they're going to end up, right? But they're not doing anything. They're not launching anything. They're not doing anything, and people don't realize after 10 years, why would you quit? Everything's supposed to be advancing, yet they quit. So how's it going to advance?
It's so sad because when Orville and Wilbur Wright flew their first plane at Kitty Hawk, they flew it 4 times in total. The first flight was about the length of a jumbo jet.
Shorter than the wingspan, 10 feet off the ground. I was just looking that up as far as records go. There's another record that was set in 1890 where they got 8 inches off the ground. Well, if you're running down a field and you hit a bump, you could get the 8 inches, right? That's what I call a pissing contest. Somebody said, I'm first, right? Before the Wright brothers, I'm first. I got 8 inches off the ground. Bullshit. Right?
After the Wright brothers had flown, in 1919, Alcott and Brown flew across the Atlantic. That's quite an advance. That's quite an achievement. I mean, 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. And then Charles Lindbergh did it solo in 1927. The first passenger jet was flown in 1953, just 50 years after Orville and Wilbur Wright. That was the Comet, built in the UK, I should say. Then the first jet aircraft were flying, as I say, 50 years after the Wright brothers. And then we have the supersonic Concorde that was flying first flight in 1976, but the first tests were done in 1969, around the time of Apollo.
Yep.
Because it wasn't a commercial success, it was very expensive aircraft, only 16 built. The first rockets were launched by Wernher von Braun, who was a Nazi, by the way, if anybody says he wasn't. He was a Nazi, he had a Nazi party number. If you want to know what it was 5738692. That was Wernher von Braun's Nazi membership number, 1938. So let's have a little less about von Braun was not a Nazi, he was. The first rocket was fired in 1942, the V2 rocket that devastated London. 2,500 of them flew. And then we have all the other rockets, but a lot of them failed. This is what people fail to realize, that a lot of the early rockets, the Redstone rockets, didn't work all that well. They kept collapsing back onto the launch pad. But Apollo had this almost unique record of success. Except for one, it's Apollo 6, it almost shook itself apart. And right through the Apollo moon landing saga, it all worked perfectly. That's not how science works. I mean, 2 shuttles disintegrated, the Challenger and Columbia. That's 2 out of 5. And only 50% of missions sent to Mars were successful. So the idea that Apollo was totally successful 50 odd years ago flies in the face not only of history but of science. But these parrots do not accept that. They have to big up NASA all the time. They have to tell us what wonderful people they are. And somebody even had the ridiculous idea that, well, how could you produce these millions of pages of documents if it was all faked? What a stupid question to ask. They were all totally legitimate.
Most of the data was being collected through simulation.
Yeah, of course it was. It was being documented, so the idea that there was a hoax, because if 400,000 people were going to be told it was a hoax, who was going to tell them, and how were they going to be told?
Henry Ford could have done the same thing in the 1920s. He could sit there and say, oh, I got a car that'll go 400 miles an hour. I got one that'll go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, right? And you say, how do you do that? He'll show you the turbocharger, the superchargers, double overhead cams, electric motor hybrid design. He already had that back then. None of this stuff is new.
No, it's not.
The first engines they built were turbocharged because they had no idea that the engine would actually suck air in.
Yeah.
So they had to blow it in, right? So if you put all the documentation together and say, well, this is the one I did, but it cost a lot of money, so we just built this one that went 30 miles an hour. It had 12 horsepower and goes 30 miles an hour, right? But here's all the designs to go 400 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And exactly those same designs can actually do that today. You don't have to overcome radiation, vacuum, heat, and being totally isolated with a very small amount of consumables to travel any distance.
Yeah.
Like if you build a very fast car, you're going to have to fill the tank up pretty quickly. So when you do that, your consumables go up, and when you're going into space, the consumables go way up.
Yeah, they do.
And that's why rocket technology will not get us anywhere.
No, it can't do. Chemical rockets are so 20th century as to be almost obsolete already, and they're still using them.
Yeah.
I mean, NASA, you would expect, would start working on some more advanced technology to launch themselves into space, but they don't appear to be doing it.
Well, they've come up with the ideas, but they can't make any of them work.
So one has to ask the question, well, did the first ideas work as well as they keep telling us, and their groupies keep telling us?
Well, they don't work today.
No, that's true. But don't forget, there are also academics who are in on this as well. These are the academics who you'd think would be a little bit more informed as to whether they can actually do what NASA claimed.